Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome back to the workbench for another unboxing. Today I'm taking a look at this, the Airfix Supermarine Spitfire Mk.1a in 1/72 scale. So join me as I get stuck inside the box and see what this kit is like. So starting off on the outside, we've got the fairly typical styling from Airfix with the red band at the bottom of the information about the kit. This particular product has a code of A01071C, so there's been quite a few different versions. We have the Spitfire in a dogfight with what appears to be Bf-110s, and you can see this particular aircraft has a yellow spinner. I know there's a little bit of a question regarding historical accuracy, so we'll flip over to the back, and there is actually a note here on the painting and decal placement instructions about the yellow spinner. It does say that most representations of this aircraft show it with a yellow spinner, but it may not have had that one. It's possible that it could have been a number of other ones. I've read online that it could have been white, it could have been sky. So, you know, you do your own historical research. Airfix have provided it in yellow. If you don't want to do it in yellow, you don't have to. But the paint colour callouts here are pretty good. We've got the Humbrol one suggested down the bottom here. And you can see we've got all of our little decal placement marks to tell us where we need to put them. I like it when they do the painting instructions in color because it just makes it so much more clear to understand what we're supposed to be doing. Over here on the right hand side, it tells us that these decals are manufactured by Cartograph, so they should be up to a normal good quality, and that brings us onto the side of the box. So the side of the box has some dimensions and some information about the actual aircraft. So we have 127mm in length, 156 in width, and 36 parts included. Again, another image of the paint scheme, and then we have a skill number. So skill number 1 indicates that this is perhaps one of the easier kits in the range, but it's not like a starter set or anything. It is just the straight up kit inside the box. We have one flying hour though. That's a coupon. Cut it out, keep it. If you're a member of the Airfix Club, you can redeem your flying hours against more kits, or send them to Models for Heroes, who can redeem them for their charitable work. This side of the box has some health and safety information, but it does quite handily have our tooling information. So tooling is when the model kit was designed and its first run effectively existed. So the design of this kit dates from 2010. However, the particular version we have here dates from 2024. I think it may have actually been part of the 2025 range. I can't remember specifically, but it is one of the most recent versions of this kit out there. So this kit has been around since 2010. It is a little bit dated, but it has got an updated paint scheme inside of the box. Thin edges just feature the same kind of thing that we've already seen, which allows you to identify it on the shelf. And unusually, I haven't actually had this kit open yet, so let's do that. Now, I'm not going to linger too long on this particular kit because this is a tooling which I have built a number of times, so I don't feel like I need to spend too much time looking at it. Instructions are to the normal format from Airfix, information about the kit, little hints and tips and some addresses down the bottom, and then we open up. Some more information on this page here, as well as a key to the different symbols, and then we crack straight on with the build. So this is quite typical of this particular tooling. We build up the various cockpit interior. There is a pilot, there is a decal for the control panel, and then we also can build up our propeller assembly. If we install it at this point using the retaining pin inside of the fuselage, we can have it freely rotate. It's a slightly older design. Airfix tend to have a method of installing props in more modern kits, which allow you to paint them first and then add them after you've built the kit. Whereas this is a slightly older design, so it has this kind of function here. It does tell you that you can have your pilot seated inside of the aircraft. However, I think that the pilot might need a little modification. I think I've had to cut his feet off before to get him to fit, so just be aware of that. Then we come on down. Quite a lot going on in this step, but it is primarily joining the wing halves together, which get added to the fuselage, and the tail surfaces are also attached. Cockpit comes as a single piece. No open cockpit is provided, and we have engine exhaust, which sometimes I leave off to the end. Internally here, it's telling you to paint the landing gear bay area in the sky type color. And sometimes it does also recommend that you paint where the machine guns would be in a black color, just to make them look a little bit tidier or neater. If we flip over our aircraft, we then have lots of little details and things on the bottom to add in. There's a navigation light or something like that, which goes in the bottom. We have air intakes and radiators, tail wheel, and the option to have our landing gear raised or lowered. Parts are included for both of these if you would prefer. This also then brings us down to, if you are doing it in the lowered position, you can have your wheels attached, and they do have a flattened edge, which is quite nice, which simulates the weight of the aircraft pushing through them. And then the aerial mast is attached at the end, and this just gives an indication of where the wheels kind of should be, how like sort of splayed out they are for when it's on the ground. And that's the instructions. Fairly straightforward, not much to see there, fairly easy to follow. This brings us on to the decals. The decals are manufactured by Cartograph and to the normal standard. They look pretty good. There is a little bit of like dust on the top, but that's come off no problem. Registration is good, printing is good. We do have a few little stencils and things as well up here, and the printing there is pretty good. Like you can see, it literally says not to be walked on, so it has come out pretty nicely. And there's our control panel. Not that much of the internal cockpit area will be visible in the finished build, but the transfers look pretty good, don't they? I don't normally have any problems applying Cartograph decals, and I expect these will go on to the model without an issue. Only one paint scheme is included, but this is kind of a budget boxing. This brings us on to the parts, and this should be quite familiar to anyone who's built an Airfix Spitfire Mk.1 before. Clear parts come in their own little bag, so we'll get that one out. So the clear parts then, one little sprue, you get your little light which goes on the bottom. I normally just add that at the end of the build. And then we have our actual cockpit canopy. And despite the fact there's been a load of production runs of this kit, the canopy looks all right. There's not really anything in the way of scratches or blemishes. Perhaps the plastic is a little wavy in a few places, which affects how transparent it is and how well you can see through it. But, you know, it's not a bad canopy. The framework is relatively proud, so if you wanted to mask this yourself and cut along your tape following the lines, that's not too difficult to do. The only thing I would say about this canopy is that there is a small known fault with it, and it is ever so slightly too long at the back. You just need to sand down about 0.5 millimeter off the back here, and then it will fit onto the sort of fuselage nicely. That is a known fault. I've had to do that a few times just to sand off a little bit of plastic at the back here, just to get it to fit nicely. But for the most part, despite the age of this tooling and the number of production runs it's had, the clear parts look okay. This brings us on to the rest of the kit, which has 2 dark grey plastic sprues, which is quite typical of the colour plastic that Airfix are currently using for their releases. Given the age of the kit, and I already know the main issue with this one is the overly deep panel lines. This, dating from 2010, was back when I think just after Hornby had taken over the business. Airfix were redesigning a lot of their sort of staple kits, and this was one of the first ones. And as a result, the kits were not necessarily as refined as they perhaps are today, which means that the panel lines are quite deep, which is why sometimes when I build this kit, I don't actually even bother putting a wash or anything on, because just let shade and shadow do that for me. The details, though, are fairly nice. You can see there are a few little scuffs in a few places. I think they may have actually polished the tooling, because you can see there are some little scuffs on the side there. I think they've polished the tooling because it's not looking too bad, but there is a bit of a scratch down one of these panels here. The smaller parts present, we have our spinner, air intake. There is a small sink mark on that one. There is a little bit of flash in a few places, which will just need cleaning up. But despite the age of the kit and the amount of production runs it's had, it's not looking too bad. I have had them in the past where they've looked a bit tatty, but actually this one doesn't look too bad. I think they may have polished the tooling up since I last looked at one of these kits, because it is looking a little bit nicer. Internally, we do have some cockpit detail on the fuselage walls, but there are some ejector pin marks here which may need a little bit of attention just to tidy up, as they are a little bit untidy. Ejector pin marks for the most part are on non-visible surfaces, so it shouldn't be too bad. So that's the sprue A, and then that brings us on to sprue B. So again, panel lines are quite deep and thick, but that's consistent with the rest of the kit. Upper wing surfaces, engine exhausts, that's our pitot tube, part of the cockpit, rudder, lower wing surfaces, doesn't look too bad. I think, yeah, I will probably go with they've polished this up, because there are some little scuffs and things here, but it's not as bad as it had been in previous versions that I've had of this kit. we have our raised landing gear option here, and then our pilot figure. So the pilot figure is the generic one from this time period, so it doesn't necessarily fit as nicely as it probably could, and I think I remember having to just remove a little bit off his feet just so he gets inside of the cockpit, but it's not a bad figure. But for the most part, it's looking okay. I know some people won't necessarily like the overly chunky details that this kit does feature, but it is a fairly straightforward and pleasant build, which is part of the reason why I picked it up again, just as something nice and easy to do. So let's wrap this one up. We had 2 dark grey plastic sprues, moulded to a moderate quality. There is some flash, there is some ejector pin marks, which might need a little bit of attention. The details are reasonably good, but they are quite chunky. But it does appear to me that they have addressed some of the damage to the tooling, which I've seen in previous versions, because it appears to have been polished. The plastic as well is relatively dense and not as greasy as I've had from other releases from Airfix. They tend to use quite a lot of mold release in the factory, but this one doesn't feel too bad. Perhaps a slight wash would benefit the plastic to help paint stick, but it doesn't look too bad. Clear parts, again, they look pretty nice. Nothing really to complain about there, other than the fact we do have to be aware that we might need to shave off about 0.5 millimeter just to make sure that it properly fits onto our model. Cartograph decals printed to a nice quality. I don't expect any problems applying those onto the kit. Our instructions, fairly simple and straightforward. Exploded diagrams are fairly intuitive to follow. All of that came contained within this box, which has our decal and painting placement instructions on the back. This is typical with these Series 1 kinds of kits. They're almost like a budget boxing, almost like a pocket money kind of kit. So this just helps keep costs down by putting these things in these places. Also, it's quite nice when you pick it up off the shelf, you can see immediately which paint scheme you're going to get inside the box. Of course, you only get the one, but we do have this lovely artwork on the front, which goes some way to making you want to pick this one up and give it a go. So I'm not going to go into the depths of the history of this kit. We know from the tooling date that it was a 2010 tooling. This kit has been in and out of the Airfix range effectively ever since then. I've built it in a number of different boxings. I think like there was a starter set version I've done. I might have done it in another version as well. And it does actually have some other parts which are designed to complement this kit so that you can do a Mark 1 early with a 2-bladed prop, a Mark 2 or a Mark 5. But those boxings are a little bit more rare, and those parts only come in those boxings. They're not present in this one. I did actually build the Mark 5A version. It's the same kit. It's like 99% the same model. So this is an impression of what it kind of would look like by the end. I think the main differences were like the spinner was a different component and possibly something else. I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically this is kind of the kit in its finished condition. Naturally, of course, mine represents a Mark 5A rather than a Mark 1A, but it's mostly the same model kit, and it's fairly pleasant to do. There are some little areas perhaps along the nose here. There's a seam which might need a little bit more attention, and on the bottom as well, but it builds up into quite a nice little model. You can do it fairly quickly. It's reasonably pleasant, and I quite enjoy them for that reason, which is why I went and got another one. So if you wanted to get your hands on one of these kits, they are currently in the Airfix range at the time I'm making this video, retailing for £8.99, which is kind of along the lines of it being a budget pocket money kit. Granted, you might be able to find it slightly cheaper in other retailers, but I would say that £8.99 is one of the cheapest kits that you can get from Airfix, particularly for an aircraft, and actually, I don't think that's too bad value for what we've seen inside of the box. Of course, there may well be other 1/72nd scale Spitfire Mark 1s which are more scale accurate and not necessarily as chunky, but for a fairly pleasant and straightforward build, I don't think you can go too far wrong with this particular kind of boxing. And with that, I think I'm going to leave this one here. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my unboxing review and if my assessment of this kit was fair. Don't forget that we do have a Model Minutes Model Club, and if you'd like to join the Model Club, just like these guys on screen, and get exclusive access to early videos and other perks, check out the links in the description. Massive thanks to these Model Club members for helping me to create consistent content. There are other ways to help support the channel if you'd prefer, but the best way to support the channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.